Hey everybody, we are back, and I have cat ear headphones,
Trying
and
something new.
we're again because Elvira and I are very experimental.
Yeah.
We like to try different things. Yeah, we're trying a different kind of setup. It's called Riverside, and if it works, then we'll tell you all about it. So hey Elvira, how are
Hey, I'm
you?
good. I'm excited. We're going to talk about. I feel like this is like an entertainment style episode because we're talking about things that we
Yeah.
love that in forms of entertainment, but also more deeply into it and complex reasons on maybe why we like these two certain
Yeah.
genres of film. So I'm excited about it today. Fun.
Yeah, me too. So Elvira and I were like, we had this really like epic marathon talk yesterday, and we were on the phone for a long time. And so we started talking about like, kinds of music we like and what does that mean. And then so we realized that we both like two, I think, kind of sort of unusual genres of film because this is, I don't know. I don't
I
know. Yours is
wouldn't
not
go
as unusual. I
unusual.
don't know.
Yeah.
Unusual.
I mean, I feel like because I love horror movies. I mean, I love all kinds of movies. I have very
Yeah.
eclectic taste. I mean, I love particularly older films. I don't like a lot of things made recently, but horror is one of my favorite ones, and I've loved it even since I was a child. So that's one thing that kind of got us in that spiral of conversation of like, oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so why do you like that? And then you going with your taste, which is disaster
Yes.
films, which I personally don't
Disaster
like.
films.
To me, that's
Yeah.
very realistic horror because there is that element of reality that
Mm-hmm.
a meteorite could have come and hit us. You know what I mean? Like that's a big possibility. So
Yeah.
to me, that's extremely terrifying. So I figure,
Yeah.
to me, I call that more of horror in my world,
Yeah.
compared to my cheesy Freddy. You know, like yeah, that
Yeah.
going on
And
straight
on the
different thing.
flip side, I don't like horror films in general because they scare me. And I don't like to be scared. So yeah, this was a really interesting thought. And so yeah, we would definitely like to hear from other people who are watching. If you want to share in the comments, what's your favorite kind of film and why? Because we were talking about we have friends who love rom-coms or like my husband loves like comedies, like just straight up like he'll go when he's surfing through Netflix or whatever, he'll go right to the comedies. And I'm always like kind of rolling my eyes that he can't see it. It's an internal eye roll because I'm like, oh god, not another like lame comedy. It's very rare that I will like laugh at an Adam Sandler movie, and it's not because there's anything wrong with Adam Sandler. Please don't get me wrong. But I don't enjoy those as much as and I think, and then there's people who like dramas, like really emotional family dramas, and I'm like, nope, got enough of that on my end, don't
Me
want that.
neither. Yeah, I'm not into the like Lifetime movie network at all. I mean, I watch it because it's hilarious if it's on at my
Oh
parents'
yeah.
house. But I won't
Yeah.
realistically go and go. I can't wait to watch that. Like we're talking about Hallmark movies. Like that's just something I
Yeah.
would
Yep.
never want to sit down and watch unless it's for laughs, for
Yeah.
example.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah.
I just can't get
I
into
used
it.
to love, they always used to have the Lifetime movies on when I used to get my nails done. And so I would see like an hour and 10 minutes of a Lifetime movie. And you usually came in like somewhere in the middle. And everybody in the salon was laughing at these movies, like that it was just ridiculous. Or you're like yelling at the screen, like, what are you, a moron? Your husband's cheating on you. It was just,
Very
like the
formulaic
fact,
and predictable. I
yeah.
feel like with a lot of the
Yes.
Lifetime movies, it's like a couple,
Yeah.
someone has amnesia, there's someone's cheating on someone, the babysitter's the killer. I don't, it's always the
Yeah.
same
Yep.
type of scenario. So
Hmm.
it's almost like easy to watch because we know
Yeah.
what's going to happen. So I think that's why
Hmm.
sometimes those films do work in certain scenarios. If you are just getting your
Oh
nails and
yeah.
it's something that you don't have to really like pay attention, like a very artistic
Yes.
film
Hmm.
that that you have to really watch and make sure you learn about every single
Yeah.
character because if you miss 5 minutes you're not going to know what's going to happen at the end. So that's one thing with Lifetime movies and those type of films, that they
Yeah.
are easy background movies that you can watch
Well,
while
yeah,
you're
and
getting your
also
hair.
rom-coms. And I just want to be clear that like I think I don't want us to sound like judgmental or elitist about like what we like and what we don't like, or that people who like those things, like there's something wrong with you. We like we're going to talk about the reasons why we like these two particular genres, and other people will have equally as valid reasons for the kind of movies that they like to watch. I mean, I'm sure there's a really valid reason why my husband likes to watch those movies, likes to watch comedy. I'm sure it's like a good reason. So, you know, yeah,
A good
for
comedy's worth
me,
it. I love.
yeah.
I like watching,
Oh, yeah.
more of a stand-up comedy than I do watch like in comedy
Oh, love
films.
stand up.
Like
Yeah.
I'm really excited. I haven't seen Ali Wong's new special yet, but I love her.
No, neither
So
have I. I love her.
she's just
Yeah.
absolutely so hilarious. So I mean, I love comedy. So it's not that I won't actively search out a comedy film. Like to me, it would be more of like there's this particular actor that I enjoy watching, and he's made a
Yeah.
comedy. I'm like, I'll watch it because I like the actor. Very rarely
Yeah.
will I, like I said, I will go out and choose to pick that movie if I'm just surfing the apps nowadays, surfing the
Yeah.
apps to pick out a movie.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So I'm a disaster movie girl, and I have, when I was thinking about it, I think that the love started because my dad used to take us to see disaster movies, probably at an age when I certainly should not have been like, I have to look up the years that some of these movies came out, but I remember vividly going to see Earthquake in the movies and also The Towering Inferno and the Poseidon Adventure. And, I think in some ways, maybe, being exposed to it at such a young age, it wasn't, I don't know, as scary for me. I don't know. But the thing that I love about disaster movies, the first part is the cinematography of the actual disaster itself, like when you finally get to that part. And I love like modern disaster movies, the disaster's happening way earlier in the in the movie. They don't make us wait as long, like we don't care about the characters, just get to the part where everything blows up or falls down or the meteor hits, and then we have to deal with it. It was so amazing, like Poseidon Adventure. I mean, the whole ship like turns upside down, and then the rest of the movie, it's kind of like trying to get from the top of the boat to the bottom because it's upside down. And that was really interesting. Earthquake was really funny because it was done in something in the movie theaters called Sense Around. And I happen to think Earthquake is one of the worst disaster movies because it's just so lame. But all Sense Around was they took speakers and like they laid them flat on the floor of the theater and cranked the bass. And so it like tried to make like it feel like you were vibrating when it was
I mean, it's like
Sense
modern day,
Around.
what is it, the RPX theaters now, where they
Yeah.
have like multiple
Yeah.
speakers, and you get kind of like it's almost like surrounds you completely in that
Yeah.
immersive like situation.
Yep.
See, that's like an interesting question since you grew up with the original, you know, disaster films, more of original,
Yeah.
I guess, and then you go into now where it's a lot more CGI and a lot less
Hmm.
physical. Do you still like disaster movies just as much, or are you clinging on to more of the original style films because you have more of that warm memory of going to see that with your dad?
Yeah, I think there's the answer's twofold there. I feel like with the CGI stuff, they've been able to do these things on a much grander scale because they're not like in the Poseidon Adventure. It was a little tiny like boat model, like in a pool of water. So they were limited, but to me, I think that was really cool what they were able to do. Like Armageddon is one of my all-time favorite movies.
That's a good
The one
movie.
with
That's
Bruce
a
Willis
really
and Ben
good
Affleck.
movie.
Love that.
I like the
Because
soundtrack.
I
I
love
like the
the
soundtrack.
character. Yes. Great soundtrack. The characters are so good. So good. And so I think that's one thing that the difference for me now is today's disaster films, if I'm going to like it, the characters really matter and the story really matters. So the characters have to be really compelling. Where in the old disaster movies, those characters were so one-dimensional and they were usually played by actors that used to be popular but were now like on the B list. And the only work that they could get was disaster films. Like Shelley Winters is in Poseidon Adventure. And the famous thing, have you ever seen the Poseidon Adventure?
No, because I don't like disaster
The original?
films. I'm
Oh, that's
familiar
right.
with. I mean, I've seen clips of it.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with the film,
Yeah.
but
So there's this scene where Shelley Winters, who, if you don't know, she was a large framed woman, and now she was kind of towards the end of her career, and so she's playing like I think she's a grandmother in the movie, who used to be an Olympic swimmer. She somebody has to swim for a really long distance underwater and be able to hold their breath. And so like this grandma does it. But it's just a really famous scene because it's just so like,
But
wow,
that goes
what
into
the
what we were
heck?
talking about earlier, where you're saying that one thing about disaster films, you love that someone turns into the hero. And most people do turn
Yes.
into the hero when you are put in those situations where you're like, I don't know you, you're a stranger, but we're in this
Yep.
disaster. Let's get out together. So it's kind of,
Yeah.
so even though it's, yes, it's a little campy, grandma going
Yeah.
deep sea diving, but it's one of those
Hmm.
things where like she turns into the hero. It's the unexpected.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
one thing about disaster films that I have to agree with you. I think they have to have strong character development so you feel for
Mhm.
those characters. So you want them to survive. So you want them to go
Right.
save everybody. You want Bruce Willis to go up there and use the drill
Yep.
and save everyone and the
I
planet doesn't
will
bring
make 800
and like
feet. Yep.
it's like one of those things. So yeah, you have to have good character development in those films so where you really connect with them. So then someone turns into, like you said, we have that hero element
Yeah.
in those films. So I can see why you would enjoy those because you want someone to be
Yeah.
the that it's like not always a happy ending because obviously a lot of people die in a lot of disaster
No.
films, but you have
Yeah.
that hero aspect to the movies.
Yeah, and I liked like the unexpected heroes, or the and that's what I think is really cool. I think in older disaster movies, like it would be Steve McQueen or Paul Newman or some other big guy actor, and of course he was like the end all and be all. And nowadays I think the one of the things that's really great about disaster movies is, although like in Armageddon you've got Bruce Willis, right? So he was like obviously like the anchor of that movie, but you also have some really quirky characters who under no circumstances would anyone, and I think that's like the great thing about that is they are just like this band of misfits. And I think when they're walking out in their spacesuits and the real astronauts see them for the first time in their spacesuits and they go talk about the wrong stuff and making a joke about the right stuff movie. I like that. I like that a lot. And I like that because it's real. It is real. When people are faced with a disaster, the unexpected people end up becoming the heroes because until you're in that situation, you don't realize that you have it in you. But in those moments of just disaster, right? People, and what I love is like, so in 9/11, for example, which was like a horrible thing and also a disaster, and I live about 30 minutes away, so it was very like it was happening, it was very real to us. And there were so many stories of heroism and strangers helping strangers. And in that moment, in that time, all of the other boundaries that exist between people, whether real or imagined, or prejudices and things like that, it all just slips away, and we just become human. And there was a gentleman who there was a gentleman in a wheelchair, and so obviously he couldn't go down the stairs in the towers. And there was another man with him who did not know him, but they just were on like the same floor. They weren't like buds. Maybe they knew each other in passing, but it's not like, oh my God, he's my best friend. And he said, he called his wife and said, look, I'm going to stay with this guy until the fire department gets here because I don't want to just leave him up here alone. And unfortunately, the tower fell before help ever came. But like he didn't have to do that. He didn't know this man. It was just, there's another human being here, and I'm not going to abandon another human being. I can't do that. And then later on in the day, we didn't know then that there weren't going to be survivors. And so from all over Manhattan, the steel workers all started coming down off of their scaffolding and off of the buildings they're working on, and they just poured out into the city streets because New York is constantly under construction. It's just like never going to be finished. And they started walking downtown, and it was almost like they were marching downtown with all of their tools and their toolboxes and blowtorches and all this stuff because they knew that they were uniquely qualified to try to rescue people out of these broken buildings. And I remember just crying because in that moment, there's a divide a lot of the times, everywhere. But like in New York City, there's like, the people who build the buildings and the people who own those buildings and then the people who work in the upper floors of those buildings. And there's a lot of a class divide there. There was human beings are trapped and I can help. And so I'm going. And that's what I love about disaster movies is that it shows like it shows there's always like a jerk. There's always a jerk in a disaster movie just to remind us that there are jerks.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it just reminds us that human beings can be really, really good.
They can be selfless
And help each other.
That there is that
Exactly,
element of
selfless. Yeah. And I love that. That always, I get chills. I get chills when I watch Armageddon, you know, that these ragtag guys, you know, make this huge sacrifice to save the world, you know? And it just, and then I'm not going to blow the ending, but the ending still gets me every time.
I know.
There's a big moment in that movie where somebody makes a heroic thing happen, and it just
Well,
like,
that's one thing about those style of films where you do connect with the character. There is that love emotion. There is that fear emotion because there is reality within that. And there's also, you know, like you said, the selflessness and the heroism. So there's drama. So, I mean, there are more elements to as a disaster film than explosions. You know, there isn't just big booms. I mean, there is a lot of movies that are like that, unfortunately. They tend to not to do well in the box office. But overall, though, you get to hit all of those different elements within that movie. So I feel like when you say disaster film, it's not just like, oh, I like watching things or CGI or, you know, just back in the day, the special effects. But there's a lot more complexity and depth to it. And then also hearing that, you know, you did go with your dad to go see these movies. So you have that connection of like, this is what we used to watch together. So then it obviously goes into your adulthood, into what you're watching.
Yeah.
So I love that. So it's warm, fuzzy feelings.
Warm fuzzy feelings. So like warm fuzzy feelings about horror movies.
Yes, I do. I get a lot of comfort within my horror genre. Again, there's so many subgenre nowadays with everything from movie to music. There's no longer just like horror. There's like sci-fi horror, and there's, you know, romantic horror, and there's all. I mean, vampires have their own subgenre nowadays. It feels like, which I can't say anything.
Yeah.
Love vampires.
Love vampires.
Not a zombie person at
lying.
all. Zombies are
No
not
zombies,
for me.
no.
Zombies is probably one of my biggest legitimate fears. I will stand naked and do a speech in front of the whole entire country, but I would not want to be around zombies. Like, I cannot do zombies.
Me too. I didn't know that about you.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, me too. Dead things need to stay dead. If you're not a vampire, then don't come back, please.
Zombies are very
Don't.
real to me. Like World War Z, 28 Days Later, those like chemical I can't say that word for some reason, but like
Chemical warfare. That's a hard one to say.
That word cannot come out of my mouth.
Chemical warfare.
I want to roll my R on that. You know, that is so terrifying to me. So I love horror for different reasons. Like growing up, it's kind of the same thing with you. Like I wasn't censored as a child. I wasn't censored when it came to music and movies. Censored for a lot of other things, but not when it came to those. They always told me, I mean, my parents were like, watch whatever you want. That's not real. And I was like, oh, okay. I know it's like such a simple conversation to have, but my parents just talked to me. They were straightforward with me. They're like, okay, that's a spooky thing. It's not real. There's no guy with like, you know, scissor finger things that are going to attack you in the middle of the night wearing a fedora. You know, I mean, it's not going to happen. And, you know, so I kind of knew that. You know, I was just like, all right, cool. So then I always grew up around horror, and I thought it was campy, it was funny, especially the slasher films. I love slasher films from the 80s, and to me, I never took them seriously. The acting on most of them are very awful. Not too many Oscar winners in a lot of these slasher films, like Sleepaway Camp and things like that. You know, it's just, for me, I do get that warm feeling because I remember sitting in the living room, lying on the living room floor and watching, you know, Chucky and, you know, Friday the 13th and all these other movies and going, it's just a guy in a costume. And I love Halloween because I love dressing up and being able to be different people and personas, and a little bit of that. I think that's what got me into being a performer. So I think horror really did affect me through not only my childhood, but also going into adulthood, into what I like of that artistic expression. And I have a couple different like adjectives, I guess, descriptive words that I wrote down that to me, there is a big art element of the special effects. I'm not a fan of CGI. I would rather have physical things to interact with. When I watch movies, I can really tell the difference. And that's one thing I loved, especially about the rage of the 80s films. It was all about latex, fake blood, fake spit, fake all these things.
What was his name? Rick Baker? Rick Baker was a big makeup artist, wasn't he?
Oh gosh, no, I can't
Yeah.
think of his name now. Mustache. He was in From Dusk Till Dawn. I can't think of his name now. I'll put a
Yes.
picture of him in the video
Okay.
editing.
Yeah.
I apologize for people watching the
Hmm.
podcast that is not seeing him.
Yeah.
But he was one of the biggest ones in the '80s. And if you haven't seen Into the Darkness, it's one of the best two-part, very very long documentaries about. It literally covers every single '80s horror film made.
Oh,
And it's so
interesting.
funny watching it. They go year by year and they break it down. And I love watching it because I'm like, I must have not had a life growing up because I've seen most of these movies. And and then realizing watching some of them going, wow, I haven't seen that in such a long time. I need to watch that again, and so many different elements to it. But for me, I really like horror because it does give me that adventure aspect, kind of like how you have adventure when it comes to, disaster films. To me, I have the adventure
Hmm.
of the horror, but through darkness. And I really more attracted to that. If I had to pick a time of day, I tend to like night more. So I don't know if that's
Yeah.
again being grown up around darker films. I've never looked at it as something that was evil or wrong. I just kind of watch it as a
Mm.
piece of art that's being created, and I love deep diving into our psyche. So yes, slasher films have a
Yeah.
place in my heart. Obviously, I love, as you can see, I wore my.
I know. I noticed you have your scream. Oh my gosh, you're all screamed
He's
out.
like
Look
he's
at
like
you.
call me.
It's like, oh, that's funny. That's a good one.
I
Wait, that's your
I
thumbnail,
know. It's
girl.
like, hey, call me.
Oh.
Anytime. David Arquette. I love him in that movie. But for me, it was one of those things where I was really attracted to where it can really almost like give you the chills on the back of your neck, where it makes you really think, kind of again similar to the disaster films, like what would I do in this scenario? Oh my gosh, like especially
Mm.
the psychological films. I used to
Yeah.
collect a lot of particularly Japanese and Korean horror films in the early 2000s.
Mm.
Audition is one of the most chill movie, like it gives you this chills in the back of your neck type of feeling for the last 15 minutes. Long movie, very drawn out.
Mm.
Most people don't even want to make it through the
Yeah.
film, but the last 15 minutes it really makes you think, like you really question, like, oh my gosh, I never saw this coming. And I love those type of films as well, where it makes you again get you out of that comfort zone. It's not warm and
Yeah.
fuzzy. There are a lot of darkness in this world, and to
Hmm.
completely ignore it, I feel like is almost, you're missing out on some things because it makes you really
Yeah.
introspect on yourself. So for me, I love the
Hmm.
complexity of the writing with a lot of modern films. Like I know Heredity is extremely popular. It's not one of my favorite films, but I like the
Mm.
writing and how it really makes you think of family and how it just, but in a much darker element, of course.
Yeah.
But I've always been
But
attracted
there's
to it
been a
though.
big change, right? So like you were talking about the slasher films. So just like disaster films with when CGI came in, it kind of changed how they needed to be made and for me how I enjoy them. What's changed for you over the years as there's been less in the special effects makeup and, more
Post
post
production
editing.
stuff.
Yeah, post
Yeah.
production kind of
Uh,
stuff.
I
Has that
I
changed
tend to
something for you?
now. I've noticed in more modern films, I tend to like the psychological films more. I do
Mhm.
love true crime, so for me, the more real movies I
Yeah.
tend to lean towards things that have a little bit more writing. Things I love the idea that things. This is one movie with Jessica Biel coming out, which is not a horror film, but it's a true
Mm.
crime film called Candy, and I actually can't wait to watch it because it's based off of true events, and that little bit
Yeah.
of this is something that happened intrigues and sparks my interest even more. But yeah, I'm not a
Mm.
big fan of the CGI. I mean, I do love sci-fi. I mean, The Matrix is, as we both love The
Oh yeah.
Matrix a
Hmm.
lot, so
Yeah.
I feel like special effects have their place in film. I feel like it
Yeah.
is a big form of artistic expression. I mean, I can't imagine
Mhm.
sitting in front of a computer and literally going, okay, create this out of nothingness in a
Yeah.
space. So there is that place for it, but nothing like some of these films that you watch and there's just like this big weird melting gooey skin on the face and you're like, someone made that out of latex.
Someone
That's
made
amazing.
Have you ever watched the competition show? I think it's called Face Off.
Yes. Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So one of my friend's daughters is in special effects makeup in LA, and she was on, I don't know which season. She got eliminated kind of early, but she competed on that show. I love that show. And it's funny because I don't like horror, but I'm so fascinated with the whole process of that. And I know that in our modern world, we've moved to a lot of stuff is done now motion capture, but I don't want to discount the amazing actors who do this mocap work, because now you're in like a green suit with all of these like little like white points all over the suit and your face. And like I know Andy Serkis, of course, is, he originated being the actor. He was Gollum, and that was all mocap, and that was one of the first. And so I think a lot of horror movies are using mocap, to create those, if the scarier elements, and leaning a little bit less towards prosthetics. But I also think that's a new art form that's emerging. But I do miss the idea of like, Lon Chaney, like I do like really old black and white horror movies, though.
Yes, of course. Oh my gosh.
Really, Nosferatu,
Yeah.
the original horror movie, right? But when you think about like, like when Lon Chaney turned into Wolfman, that wasn't even a mask. They were like spirit gum gluing fur all over that poor man's face.
I know. I can't imagine the rash he had afterwards. It just. Then going into like Alfred Hitchcock. Do you like any of those films? Like obviously, like
I
The
do
Birds,
love Alfred Hitchcock.
Psycho. I have a little toy of him, like a little doll of him. He's so cute.
Oh my
I
gosh,
love Alfred
him.
Hitchcock. He's so
And he was
bizarre.
a weirdo. Did you watch the movie about him and Tippi Hedren?
I started watching it and I haven't seen it, like the whole thing yet.
God,
I have all these
it's
movies where I start watching and I get
good.
distracted and I never finish it. I just
Good.
thought he was such a bizarre, especially at that time when horror
Yeah.
wasn't really big. For him to really go, I'm gonna make a movie called Psycho. It's just like
Yeah,
taking those
yeah.
risks. Is just so good. But it's funny that both of our like likes into these type of genre films both started from like our childhood. I think is just really
Yeah.
interesting. So it's I think a lot of it,
Yeah.
going back to what we've talked about in other episodes, where nature versus nurture, I do feel like some of this is hardwired into us. Like I like darker things and they make me happy.
Yeah.
My living room is all black, pretty much. My bedroom is
Yeah.
black. And for me, that's like my happy space. I'm like, oh, look, I love this like giant spider on the wall, And
Yeah.
so I think that is hardwired. But a lot of it is also, I get that warm fuzzy feeling because I remember Halloween, we'd sit down and we would watch Halloween on Halloween,
That's pretty cool.
after I got candy, and it was just like, oh, it's
Yeah.
just a guy with a mask. To me, I knew it was William Shatner, so for me it was just funny. I was like,
Yes.
oh, Star Trek guy with a knife.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't scared by him. I was just like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool. But I just think it's so interesting that both of us, it was something stemmed from childhood.
Yeah, and I hadn't really made that connection until we talked yesterday, when you said about, well, it was something that, you did with your dad. And it's true. He did, like, it was a genre that he enjoyed. And so, and we connected there. And it's interesting because I wonder, is that a thing that happens? Like, do kids connect to the content that they watch with their parents? So are, the people who love like rom-coms, well, was like, that's something like they watched with, with their mom or dad or whatever, or, musicals and things like that. Cause like, it's funny because my mom hates disaster movies. Keep in mind, my parents were separated before I was a year old. So you can see that why they might not have gotten along. But yeah, very different film personalities, and you know what? I wonder, like, married, couples. Because, I said Bill likes comedies and I don't, but he does love disaster movies too.
I think with a lot of my friendships, I'm like trying to think, I'm like, okay, Robin, this, that. I'm the only one in my circle that likes horror movies, really, except for a few of my exterior friends that I don't see very often. So I don't know if opposites attract, possibly, within friendships and relationships when it comes to film and music. But in a way, though, it's almost like you show each other different things that you would normally not watch.
Yes.
Like there's this new movie called Fresh on Hulu, highly recommended if anyone has Hulu. And I was telling Robin about it, and she hates horror films. Robin cannot watch horror films. If there's a Chucky doll in the room, she cannot be in the room.
Wait,
like,
is this the one about like fresh meat?
Yeah, where he eats the women and stuff. Really good. It's not really graphic. It's actually really funny. There's like a whole dance scene. It's really, but it really makes you think like, wow, don't go date anyone at the grocery store. That's where he gets his women. He's like, hey, check out these fresh vegetables. I'm gonna have you for dinner
Great
later.
place to pick up girls.
I know.
Yeah.
And but it's so funny that I was like, showing Robin, who again cannot be in the room with a Chucky doll, does not like horror films. I was like, honestly, you should probably try watching it. And she's like, you know what? That doesn't sound too scary. I'll watch it with you. So it's like I'm showing her something new, just like she shows me. There's a lot of times movies that I would never watch. Love her, but I would never watch it. And and she'll be like, hey, have you seen that really like cheesy movie on Netflix. I'm like, you know what? I'll give it a shot,
Yeah.
and I'll laugh at it a little bit. So it's almost like having
Yeah.
opposites attract, and we show each other something
That's
new,
true.
something different, and something that we might end up enjoying a little bit on a
Yeah.
normal
I mean,
basis.
yeah. I mean, my best friend, who is still my friend for 40 years, which is a very scary thing to say, but she loves horror movies. And when we were like in high school and college, she would, first of all, she would always rent, we'd be like doing a sleepover, and she would rent the horror movies. And I would be like, what is wrong with you? You know, this is going to scare me. And she's like, I'm with you. Nothing can happen, you know? And so I saw things like, what is it? House on Haunted Hill, or no, I saw some really, and then like we'd be going to the movies, and sometimes I would drag her to the sci-fi movies, which she didn't particularly, that wouldn't have been her thing. Like I would take her to all the Star Trek movies. But so then I would go with her to, you know, Mountaintop Motel Massacre, which is a real movie. Saw it in the movies, and I just looked at her and I was like, I cannot believe we just paid for that. And she's like, what? It was great. And I'm like, but, but yeah, I mean, I think she's the one who got me to like, I watched Friday the 13th with her. Not Friday the 13th, I'm sorry. Nightmare on Elm Street. And, you know, and like we were, before we started recording, we were talking about Freddy and how like to both of us, he's not scary, he's funny.
He's just
And I wouldn't have had that experience if
a cool guy with questionable fashion choices. You know what I mean? Like it's just he just seems like again, he just enjoys killing people. He has a great time doing it. He's cheesy. He's like campy. Obviously, how he got to that place in his life is very dark and wrong.
Very dark backstory.
Very bad dark backstory. But when you're watching the films, you don't see him as this ghoulish creature that's going to eat you. You know what I mean? It's just like you're like, oh my god, it's Freddy again. You know? It's like you gotta just roll your eyes at him.
Your head. Yeah.
He does mess with your head, and that's how he gets you, is through his funny, campy, crazy, witty type of sense of humor, which is very opposite when you look at characters like Jason, who is completely silent, and yet is so terrifying to so many people because you don't hear him coming. He's not being quirky and laughing at you. He's not a Chucky doll that runs around and you're like, okay, this is just a doll, you know. Funny that we're both doll collectors, you know what I mean? It's just kind of like, now I'm looking at my room going, please don't attack me in the middle of the night. You know, just
I'd be so dead if these things came to life.
Gone. We'd have a whole army in this house. And you know, it's just one of those things where it's just like, to me, you can take the light out of the funniest of things. You know, even disaster films, you know, there's a lot of really bad ones out there where you're just like, again,
I know.
I don't know. Like, what was that one with John Cusack, 2012 or whatever? And I'm just like, really? Like,
okay.
Okay,
like, gotta tell you. Gotta totally disagree. Love 2012. It's got all of the elements of a great disaster film. I'm just saying, it really does. Unlikely hero, people saving each other, but it also has some really great special effects and some really good lines. It has some really good kind of zingy lines in it. And I mean, Woody Harrelson.
You got to have the zingy lines.
I mean, he still, but Woody Harrelson steals that movie as basically the tinfoil hat guy who was right, you know. But it's so funny that you said that, because like I watch that movie all the time. Sometimes it's some like weekends here. It's kind of like, all right, what are we watching? Armageddon or 2012?
Oh, see, like my go-to are action films. Like you got to watch Face Off, the classics, Con Air, anything Nicolas Cage, late 90s. Yes. You know, those are the ones that I use as background films because I've seen them so many times. I can just sit there and laugh. I'm like, it's Nicolas Cage, great actor. You know, what can you say?
Yeah.
But I'm interested to see.
Comment down below how you feel about that Nicolas Cage is a great actor line.
He is so great. I mean, Mandy from 2000. Was it late 2019, early 2019? Like it came out. Great film. I mean, he can sit in front of he literally does scenes one take, and I think a lot of people unfortunately see him in these cheesy roles that he takes, and they're like, oh, Nicolas Cage. I mean, he really is really, really good.
Well, didn't he win an Academy Award for Leaving Las Vegas? I think he was either nominated or he won an Academy Award.
I don't know if he won. No, I think he was just nominated.
But yeah, I mean, I think he, you know, probably it is also a choice of like Liam Neeson is a classically trained Shakespearean actor, but Liam Neeson is now the action man. Yeah. I mean, it's like I think he put out like 2 movies already this year. I'm like, wait, are these just variations of Taken?
I hate to say it,
different guy, same story.
But it's kind of like the curse, as you know, for example, like female actors, unfortunately, as they age, don't get the bombshell roles, the
Yep.
love interest. And unfortunately, we don't talk about a lot of aging actors when they
Yeah.
start getting, unfortunately, those type of campy action roles where you're like, oh, you're the dad, go save the thing again, and it's
Yeah.
not really a Shakespearean role. It's more of like
No.
they're kind of lingering and tailcoating on their name, but then
Yeah.
also that's, oh, just throw him in that role because he's
But the
not breaking the
men,
box
yeah.
office as much. So they get almost like
Right.
pigeonholed into those type of roles,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
But yeah, I think men get a second wind. My husband calls this the James Woods thing, which I don't know, but what James Woods did is he just kind of disappeared for a while. And then once he was a little bit older, like he had grayer hair and some more like lines in his face, then he came back. And now James Woods works a lot. So I think actors, male actors hit a time in their career where there's a choice between like, all right, let me just go take an extended vacation until I'm old enough to play those older guy roles, or I'll make action movies, which is, and I think I have to think at this point, Liam Neeson must be having some sort of amusement out of the whole thing. He does it so much, and I'm sure he doesn't need to, but he gets to keep working, so
That's true.
yeah.
That's very true.
Yeah,
I'm excited to see what
it's
people throw in the
interesting.
comments of what genres
Yes.
they like, and then also why they think that they like those particular genres. Like
Mm-hmm.
both of us, like after communicating for these past 40 minutes, really going,
Yeah.
to me again, I think a lot of it was just being around it as a child. Like my parents
Mm-hmm.
weren't horror fans at all. Like, like, oh, we have to go see this new horror movie or anything like that.
Yeah.
It was just on, and they were like, yeah, you can watch it. And I just
Yeah.
remember having it connecting with like my favorite holiday, Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
So I think having that like childhood being raised around it really does influence a lot as you grow up.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested to see what
Yeah.
everyone
I'm
says in the
curious. Yeah.
comments.
Me
Yeah.
too. We are really, really curious. So please tell us, like, what kind of movies do you like? And is that in any way informed by what you were able to watch as a child? Or are there people out there for whom it's the opposite? Maybe horror was the forbidden fruit growing up, right? Or maybe violent movies or something like that. And so now as an adult, maybe that's like your genre. I don't know. I'm interested to find out because, of course, we're just making up theories in our heads. So,
I mean, yeah, and
but we would love to
especially
hear more.
communicating
Yeah.
with a lot of people who have different, likes and things like that for different genres. I've communicated with a lot of people, and they're almost like some people have said that there's a sexual attraction to certain styles of
Mm-hmm.
film, and that's what they like. And it's really interesting when I talk to some sci-fi people, and they're like, "Oh, I really am
Yeah.
attracted to aliens." I'm like, "Okay, but that's why they like those movies." And you know
Okay.
what?
Yeah.
Hey, each to their own. Same thing with horror, disaster, rom-coms, all of them in between. It's just
Yeah.
really interesting to hear everyone's take on why they like something, I guess, or why they think
Absolutely.
they like something. Because we could
Yeah.
be completely
Mm-hmm.
wrong. Like, yeah, I was raised around it, but maybe there's some other element that I'm not aware of, that maybe that's why I like it. So it's just kind of like
Yeah,
we're
maybe.
self-diagnosing ourselves on why we like certain
Yes,
things.
we are. But hey, that's fun. So this was really, really fun. Thank
I
you,
loved it.
Elvira. Yeah, it was nice to talk about something a little bit light and silly, but still, exploring. Because I think, film it has become a huge part of society and who we are. And we tell a lot of our stories in unique ways through films. And every genre of film exists for a reason because it is telling a story about something that's going on in our heads and our hearts. And so I think, we're still somewhere in the getting better together, but we're going to get better together with like Freddie and Bruce Willis.
I
That's
know.
all.
Robert Englund is great.
Yeah, man, like whatever it takes.
He signed one of my Monster High dolls, so I really like him.
Which
so.
one?
Oh gosh, it was either the black and white Frankie swimsuit or from Skull Shores, or because I've had two dolls signed, or it was Skull May's Ghoulia.
I
don't remember which
yeah,
one.
the one
He
that she's
signed
got
one
the
of those,
brain
too.
helmet.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody so much for watching and listening. Make sure you subscribe, like, follow, give us a review wherever you're listening to the podcast. And we will talk to you and see you again next week. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.